We will get started with our webinar, The Majestic Fjords of Norway, happening next May of 2023. And as I say, I'm very excited to bring this to you. Let me say a couple of words about Wheel and Anchor if you are new to us, if you're joining our webinar for the first time. We are all about bringing travelers together. What that means is that when we originally started the idea of Wheel and Anchor, it was as a travel community, which we very much are. We like to build a connection to all of our members, and our members build connections to one another. At the very beginning, we had events in different parts of Canada. We obviously haven't done that since the pandemic, and we will at some point get back to doing that. But in the meantime, on our trips, connections have been forged because as well-traveled people that most of our members already are, we have a bit of a like-minded view about how to travel, what to see. And as we say, our mantra is that you come away being well-traveled, and that is having really gone a little bit deeper than the typical sightseeing tour to get an understanding and a feeling for the countries that you visit. I'm on the last leg right now of a trip through Scandinavia and the Baltics. I'm here in Tallinn, Estonia, and we've spent 5 nights in each destination. And again, it's not about this trip, but the point is that by taking that extra bit of time, we've come to understand a little bit more about what these countries are all about. And the same thing will apply to Norway. Yeah, you have a different relationship to it. You know, when it pops up in the newspaper, an article about a country that you've been, you know, you think about it because you have a connection to the place because you've actually taken the time to understand it a little bit better. Joining me on our webinar today, my name is Gordon. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor. I think most of you know me, although I see a few new faces on the list of attendees today. I'm joined by Paula, our senior trip specialist, who's there. So many of you will have spoken to Paula on the phone at some point. And as usual, in the background, my co-founder and our technical support person, Joel. Today, I'm going to be taking you on a little journey through one of the most stunning coastlines anywhere in the world. And not just the coastline, because obviously Norway is famous for its fjords, but there's a lot more to the country. And we start off in Oslo, of course, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. I'm going to take you on this journey, and we're going to take a little bit of a look at what we would expect on our trip in May of next year. So let's dive right into the program, and I'm going to take you through day by day. And there's so many highlights, as it were, on this trip that I'm not going to mention all of them because, you know, we'd be on this for far too long. But looking at the map of the country, Norway, as we all know, is up in Northern Europe. And an interesting factoid, it's not shown on the map here, but the Norway is so far north, it's actually bisected by the Arctic Circle. So I'm not sure if my cursor is visible on the map, but literally half of Norway is north of the Arctic Circle. And that's one of the things that makes this voyage and this journey particularly unique and interesting, because if you think about where the Arctic Circle lies in Canada, well, most of us have never been up there because there isn't much there. But in Norway, it's quite the contrary. And that's why this service exists as it has done for, as I say, over 125 years. This is actually the original coastal mail steamer that brought mail and passengers and cargo all the way up the coast to all these communities that are otherwise very difficult to access. And it still does that. So that's what makes this trip different. It's a working ship. We're going to be starting in Oslo, the capital of Norway, where we will fly in via a gateway. Usually most people fly in via Amsterdam or Reykjavik or Frankfurt, and we'll begin our journey there. We'll travel overland by train and by ferry to Bergen, the second largest city, and we'll join our Hurtigruten ship for the 13-night round trip. 11-night round trip that goes from Bergen all the way up to Kirkenes in the far north on the border to Russia and all the way back. So that is our journey. So let's look at a little bit about what we can expect along the way. So as I say, the first day we'll arrive in Oslo, and because we'll have come from across the Atlantic and probably be a little bit jet lagged, we won't plan too much for the first day, but we're going to be staying right next to the railway station in Oslo. And as typical with most of our trips, It means you can arrive on whatever flight that you like. So you might want to even arrive a day early to catch up on the jet lag. But from here, you are within walking distance of most of the things in Oslo that you want to see. And Oslo is a relatively new city, as many of the Scandinavian capitals are. And so the modern architecture that you'll see all along the waterfront of the fjord is quite remarkable and striking. They're really amazing at architecture. In fact, just a few steps from our hotel is the Opera House, which was designed like an iceberg. It slides right into the fjord. It's really, really amazing thing to walk around, take a tour inside. And so we're going to spend 3 whole nights in Oslo. Here's a photo of that opera house. And I love to walk up here along this. You can walk all along the so-called roof of the thing, and you have amazing views over the city and over the fjord. And again, one of the many fascinating and unique pieces of architecture. While we're in Oslo, as I say, we're going to spend 3 whole days here. We'll have one good half a day where we'll have a guide who's going to give us an orientation tour about some of the many different things to visit. Obviously, Norway is still a constitutional monarchy. There's still a royal family. We'll visit the palace, or at least we'll pass by the palace and the parliament buildings, all the key sites in the downtown core, which again are all walking distance. We'll probably make a short trip over to the Bygdøy Peninsula, which is where you'll find, for me, some of the best museums anywhere. There's a Viking Museum, which is bar none, I think the best in the world. There is a Fram Museum, which is the ship that the explorer Roald Amundsen used to travel to the Arctic and then to the Antarctic. And there's an open air museum. There's so much to see. And so part of the time, as I say, the first half day or so, we will have a guided tour to give you a sense of the city, but we're also going to equip you with an Oslo card, or an Oslo pass, they call it there, that enables you to go around and visit all these sites on your own. And like anywhere in Scandinavia, the transportation system is so easy to use. Everything is done in English. Everybody in Norway speaks English anyway, so it's easy to get around, and you can pursue and take in the things that are of most interest to you. So it's a great beginning to the trip. Another thing that differentiates our trips, before I jump onto the Flam Railway, is that I do hand-picked local restaurants. So, and again, I don't want to diss anybody else, but most tour groups will go and they go to the typical tour group restaurant, so they eat in the hotel. Well, that's not what we do. And we have some great restaurants where you can try the authentic Norwegian kitchen, which you probably will never have had true Norwegian food before. It's actually a relatively new concept, because the Nordic kitchen was absolutely not a thing until sort of the last 20 years. And they, as the country has turned into a global economic superpower, as it were, they have also evolved their dining scene, and we will, certainly have some amazing meals along the way. After our time in Oslo, we will walk literally across the street to the railway station, and we will spend a day, which will be one of the most brilliant days that you'll remember, because we are going to do the so-called Norway in a nutshell. And what this means is we leave our suitcases in the hotel, they get transported separately, and we take a trip, first of all, by the so-called Bergen Railroad, which goes from Oslo all the way to Bergen, way up into the mountains and then down to the coast on the other side. We are going to get off part way, roughly 5 hours into the journey in the early afternoon, and get on the Flam Railway. That's what's pictured here. It is constantly rated as one of the best and most scenic railway journeys in the world, because over the span of about an hour, we go from 1,200 meters above sea level, high up in the Norwegian mountains, and we wind our way down all the way to the edge of the Sogne Fjord, or actually a branch of the Sogne Fjord, the longest fjord in the world. And I don't want to disclose too many of that, but the train actually makes a couple of photo stops along the way, and the waterfalls, and the steep cliffs of the mountains. It is truly a spectacular rail journey, and then you'll arrive and you'll literally be on the verge of your first fjords, first Norwegian fjords. And from there, we take a ferry through the Narrow Fjord. Again, amazing scenery. Then we join a coach, which takes us up a hairpin road through Stahlheim and then back to the railway, back to Voss, and where we rejoin and then continue the last leg of the trip by train into Bergen. Again, this is sort of epic Norway, and people who don't have the pleasure or opportunity to travel on Hurtigruten will typically come and do this Norway in a nutshell trip. It is amazing. We'll pull into Bergen in the evening and spend a couple of nights there. Again, I like to do a little bit of extra time because places like this city tend to get breezed through. And I think it's important that we have a full day and then almost another full day before we embark on the ship to explore this exciting city. Its best known feature is what's pictured here, the so-called Hanseatic Wharf, which dates back to the 16th century when the traders, the Hanseatic traders, obviously, which originated in Germany, but were trading all throughout the Scandinavian region. Bergen was one of the bases, and all of these houses are original wooden structures that have been around since those days. And it's amazing to walk around through here and get a feeling for this town, which is still very much dependent on the fishing industry, to some extent oil. Of course, Norway and all of this offshore oil, but it retains a sort of a bit of an old world charm, while also having a number of, fascinating and new architectural monuments. You have Edvard Grieg Museum. There's lots to do on our 2 nights in Bergen. Again, part of that will be a guided tour, so you get an orientation of where everything is. It's again pretty much all walkable, but then there'll be half a day and then almost another full day until we get on our Hurtigruten ship to explore Bergen on your own with a Bergen card, so you can use the public transit. You can take the funicular up Mount Fløyen for an amazing view over the city and the fjords, and you will truly enjoy your time in Bergen. So on the afternoon of the next day, we will head to the Hurtigruten port and check in to our ship that will be our home for the next 11 nights as we make all the way our voyage all the way north and all the way south along the Norwegian coast. And we're going to be sailing on the Richard With. Now, Hurtigruten has a fleet of roughly 13 ships because this trip, this cruise, and I hesitate to use the word cruise because it's a bit different than a conventional cruise, it goes every single day of the year. So literally it departs on the same itinerary from Bergen every day of the year. And I chose this particular date because the Richard With, although many of the ships, which are part of the so-called, I think they called them the contemporary fleet, were built at the same time about 25 years ago, but they were all recently completely overhauled. The Richard With was the last one to be overhauled just before the pandemic. And so the decor on board is this sort of Scandinavian. Part of it makes you feel like you're walking through IKEA, but in a good way. It's beautifully designed on board. They now have rooms where they have lectures, which is something that Hurtigruten introduced in recent years. You've got a team of how should we say, expedition leaders that will, provide lectures about the history of Norway and many of the things that we see along the way, as well as facilitate the many different excursions that are on board. The food, the other thing is incredible now because they've made a great effort in recent years to do sort of farm to table. So almost all of the food that gets served comes from some port along the way in Norway. Obviously, fish and salmon is a large part of the offering that's on board, but various other meat products, as well as, obviously not your tropical fruits, but most of the fruits and vegetables that you find on board are sourced locally in Norway. So you have 3 meals a day. You have a buffet breakfast, either a buffet or a served lunch, depending on exactly what the itinerary is, and then always a 3-course served dinner. The staterooms on board are modest. So there's a selection of various different ones. So, they're not like cruise ships. Again, this is how it differentiates itself from mainstream cruises, is that it's not about the stateroom. So they're comfortable, they're very functional. The beds are super comfortable. Everything is very well done, but they're modest inside. So here I've pictured sort of your standard inside and outside cabins. For a little bit more money, you can upgrade to an Arctic Superior cabin where they have like queen size beds in a different configuration. So, but they're cozy. You will find you spend nearly no time in your cabin other than to go to sleep at night, which in May nights are pretty short because you get close to the summer equinox. So you have, in the very far north, the sun is shining almost 24 hours a day. And because what there is to see in Norway is best taken in from the beautiful observation lounges or outside. Again, it's not about the staterooms. They do have a handful of suites available as well. So if you're the type of person that really needs to have that extra space for your accommodation, then you can let us know and we can give you a quote for a suite. So we'll depart in the evening out of Bergen, and again, we'll make our trip northbound and then turn around in Kirkenes. People ask me, why is it that we go both ways? Aren't we covering the same ports? We cover 34 ports of call in each direction. But here's the thing. The scenery is ever changing all along the trip. And the itinerary, the schedule of the ship, which hasn't changed since I've been working with Hurtigruten for about 23 years, the schedule hasn't changed in all that time because with the ports that you hit in the nighttime on the way north, the ship is sailing night and day, you hit in the daytime on the way south. So therefore, there will be places that the ship calls in at and scenery that you pass by that you'll miss because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, but you'll see it during the day on the way back. And the excursion program takes that into account so that there are excursions in ports of call, different ports of call, all the way up to the north and all the way back. The first day, the first full day on the ship, so we'll overnight and we will arrive in about 9 o'clock in the morning in Ålesund, which in and of itself is a beautiful city. The city was burnt to the ground 100 years ago, and when they rebuilt it, everything was done in Art Nouveau or Jugendstil type architecture. So it's a charming, charming city. But the one thing that we're going to do, which nobody else does in May, is we're going to make a special private boat trip that I have organized. And we are going to go, oops, the slide didn't come in, doesn't show up. I must apologize for that. So we are going to go into the so-called Geiranger Fjord. And we actually showed a picture at the very beginning of the presentation. I won't go back to it now. But I've chartered a private boat and just our group is going to be cruising all the way into this most spectacular fjord that is, it's the postcard of Norway, if you will. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, obviously a natural one, steep cliffs, waterfalls, particularly in May. And we're going to have the fjord almost all to ourselves because hardly any ships go in at that time of the year. We're going to cruise in, we're going to make a stop at the town, the village of Geiranger, and then go back out. And so that's a very special excursion that is unique to our program that we're going to be doing by private boat. There are excursions, as I say, at every single port of call along the way. We've included a few of them, what I would call sort of the best of the ship's excursions, but there are much more for you to choose from. So if you're somebody that's a bit more active, they have kayaking programs in various ports of call. In other places like Trondheim, we're actually going to be visiting Trondheim on the southbound itinerary, going to the Nidaros Cathedral, which is the largest Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe. But at every single port of call, or I should say, at every single port of call where we spend sort of more than an hour, you can get off and wander around and take in, what life is like in this rural part of Norway. And frankly, what I like to do, even if the stop is really short, is even if I pop in, go to a cafe, people watch for a little while, and you can do that at, as I say, any of the stops. Trondheim being the 4th largest city in Norway is again, one of the highlights because of all the colorful buildings along the fjord. You can go out, walk on your own, or you can take one of the many excursions that they have that explore various aspects of the city. We will make our way north the following day. After that, we will pass, and there'll be a little ceremony that I won't tell you about what exactly goes down there, but the captain will make a bit of a deal over the fact that we were going to cruise over the Arctic Circle. There is a monument that you see here, and again, a ceremony. And, the coast of Norway is ice-free all year round and that's what enables this Hurtigruten to go every day of the year, because the Gulf Stream warms the entire coast of Norway. And so you'll be amazed as the scenery changes, mountains to more flat lands, but they do farming all the way up well north of the Arctic Circle. There's hardly any other place in the world that you can do that, other than maybe in certain parts of Iceland, because again, and that's one of the phenomena of Norway. So we'll pass the Arctic Circle, we'll get up to Tromsø, which is one of the largest inhabited cities north of the Arctic Circle. It's a big university town. Here, there's an opportunity to go up the cable car, which is where this photo was taken from. This photo was actually taken in the wintertime when you have the basically darkness almost all day long. So it has a different glow to it. But when we're there in May, it's, as I say, it's going to be almost daytime, almost 24 hours. It's going to be roughly about 21 hours of daylight up in Tromsø. And once again, the ship is docking very close to the center of town. We can wander in and explore some of these beautiful places. Then about 4 days into the trip, we will hit the North Cape, the most northerly part of the European continent. And we'll make a visit to a very interesting interpretive center. You can see it perched here high up on the cliff, where they talk a little bit about the history of that. And what I always find fascinating is the battles that took place during World War II up in these very northerly waters. Is something we really don't even think about, because when you think about European history, you think about everything that happened, on the mainland in France and Germany and the Benelux countries and so on and so forth. But so much happened here, and shipwrecks and stories of German U-boats and all that stuff happened way up here at 70 degrees north latitude, the most northerly part of Europe. Our ship continues up one more day, and our turnaround point is a town called Kirkenes. Here you can do an excursion to the Russian border. Big deal these days, of course, with all the news about Russia. You can't cross the border these days, more so than ever. But nevertheless, what you learn on this excursion is a little bit about the relationship between Norway, a neutral country, and Russia. And it's, again, the dynamics that have sort of played out over time up there. Some of the passengers will leave here in Kirkenes. We will stay on board, of course, and make our way southbound. And as I mentioned before, the places that we passed in the middle of the night, like Hammerfest, for example, the home of the Royal Polar Bear Society, we will pass during the day on the way south. So you can take advantage of a different set of excursions, different activities, and walk into towns that you will have been sound asleep for on the way north. And perhaps one of the most important things that you will catch part of on the way north, but the Lofoten Islands is an archipelago of mountainous islands off the coast of the mainland. And this, for me, is Norway pure, idyllic, like you've never seen any place. Jagged high mountains, colorful little fishing villages, racks of cod drying. It is so idyllic. And again, we pass through a good chunk of it late at night on the way north, but we'll pass all through the Lofoten Islands on the way south. There's some interesting places to visit. We'll do a trip to meet the Vikings. They have rebuilt a Viking longhouse between Svolvær and Stamsund on one of the islands. So we'll get to take a chance to learn about, this was the home for so many of the Vikings, perhaps even some of the ones that made their way across the Atlantic to Newfoundland as the true first discoverers of North America. as I say, on our way south, other highlights that will pass, for example, the Seven Sisters, 7 distinct peaks of mountains. You can sort of get a glimpse of a few of them here in the picture, and a number of other amazing sites that are too numerous to mention, but details are in our brochure. And we will also give you a list of all of the excursions that you can do on this Hurtigruten cruise. One of the final things that we'll pass on the way south, which is a excursion that I do recommend taking. And this is, again, one of the things that fascinates me about Norway is the incredible infrastructure that exists in this country that links up all of these islands and fjords, the highways, the bridges, the tunnels. It will simply amaze you. I mean, you have to remember Norway is only 4.5 million people, or maybe 5 million people now. So it's not a big country population-wise. Of course, they built up this massive sovereign wealth fund as a result of managing all the money they earn from their offshore oil resources. And they've created things like this. And so as travelers, as tourists, we get to benefit by driving along some of these incredible engineering marvels like the Atlantic Road that is down in the southern part of the Norwegian fjords near the town of Molde. So one more day and we will pass the Nordfjord, one of the longest in Norway, and head back into Bergen, where we will bid farewell to our ship. We'll do one final night in Bergen. We'll have a nice farewell dinner at an excellent restaurant that I typically enjoy when I go to Bergen. And then we will make our way to the airport and fly out, make our way back home. And undoubtedly we'll have had an amazing trip through, again, what I think is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. So let me give you a few of the details about the program. Of course, all of it is in the brochure that we just completed. I was literally just taking a look at it before this webinar, and it's going to get sent out to you with a recording of the webinar. But nonetheless, I wanted to cover in some of these things. Again, I won't go through all the pricing, but just to give you a sense of the whole program, the lead-in price here is around $75.90, everything Canadian dollars. One important point I want to make here: part of the reason that this program was delayed in its release was because we were going back and forth. We've postponed this trip 3 times because of the pandemic. So we're finally able to go next year. We were haggling a little bit on the price because prices have gone up. But they have honored for us the pricing, which actually is from 2020, which was the first year that we couldn't go. After this year, I can say it's going to get more expensive, not insignificantly so. So it's the reason to go this year is because I think these prices are going to be at least $1,000 more in 2024. So it's not that it's always about the money, but nevertheless, let's face it. We got to keep an eye on those shekels in these days of inflation. So keep that in mind. Of course, the inclusions, as I mentioned, we've got 6 nights at the various hotels. We've got the Oslo pass and the Bergen card. So you can go around and do everything you want to do without having to, with all of the costs being covered. On board the ship, we have 3 meals a day. We've got dinners in Oslo and in Bergen. So there's not a ton else that you have to spend money on. The only thing would be additional excursions. There are some 50 excursions, I think at least, available on board. We've included 4 plus our special private speedboat excursion to the Geidanger Fjord. We will also arrange for you to get a shipboard credit that will cover, probably 1 more excursion. And so depending on how anxious you are to try out the different ones, those would be in addition. But a lot of people find that just the experience of being on board is enough, or going out and wandering through some of these towns on your own, which is something that you can absolutely do. So anyway, details again in the brochure. And of course, what's not included: airfare, insurance, and as I just mentioned, the additional shore excursions that you may want to do. So now it's time to answer some questions. I can already anticipate one that always comes in that I forgot to mention. He's about the weather. But Paula, let me know, what questions do we have? I'll address the weather one because I'm sure it's in there somewhere. Why are we going in May? I have been working with Hurtigruten and offering this trip long before Wheel and Anchor for many years. I think May is the best time to go. It is typically the lowest precipitation of the year. And it's not necessarily the warmest month. But again, because of the Gulf Stream, the climate in Norway is, it could be the middle of July and it could be 12 degrees and it could be April and it could be 20. You just don't know. But I find precipitation is the most important factor for me. And May, I've always had good luck in May with our groups. Again, I was there for a few days in Norway this past May, and I had pretty much perfect weather the whole time that I was there. I mean, maybe cloudy some days, but that's the time to go. It's also when the seas are calmest. And so that's maybe another question that I'll anticipate, Paula, before I get to any that have rough seas, like how rough is it? Most of the journey you are sailing, in a sort of like an inside passage. So you're not exposed to the open waters of the Atlantic, which means that the ship is pretty stable. And so you don't get a huge amount of movement. These ships are also designed with special long stabilizers that prevent that sort of lateral back and forth. So I know this last trip that I went on, again, you couldn't feel the ship move at all. That's not to say it can't happen. There are certain stretches when we are exposed to the Atlantic, and if a bit of a storm blows through, you might get some motion, but it's not really something to be concerned about. And if you are somebody that's susceptible, there's medication or there's bracelets that you can take. Anyway, I'll stop talking now, Paula, and try and answer some of the questions that have come in, unless I've.
Yeah, though, you nailed the first two, definitely, that always come in with our trips, and especially boat travel. I had a member who was asking here with regards to the accessibility of getting on and off the ship and walking around the towns. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Super easy. So first of all, it's Norway, so they don't have nearly the security, which is not to say they don't take security seriously, but it's just not necessary. So they drop the gangplank and you walk off the boat, and you have a cruise card, so there's identification that for going on and off. There's elevators on board the ship, so you can walk down the gangplank and you are at the port. And there are no formalities because it's obviously all within Norway, and then you could just literally walk into town. So it's very, very easy, painless. And as I say, there's an elevator on the ship, and so for anybody that's this cruise, there are aspects of this cruise that if you are somebody that's somewhat more mobility challenged, that are some of the excursions on Zodiac boats and so on, maybe not, but you can pretty much do most of this trip. If you're
have limitations.
Yeah, exactly. But that's something to discuss with you, obviously, Paula.
Of course.
Yeah.
Perfect. We have another question that's come in from Chris with regards to wanting your input or feedback on the customer service experience on a Hurtigruten ship, considering it's different than your typical cruise type a trip. Can you share about that?
And I see Chris's question. Thank you for that. I mean, one of the things that, again, that differentiates this is that this isn't like a typical cruise ship where you have a cruise ship full of, Filipino crew who are lovely. If you've taken a large cruise ship before, and very hospitality oriented. In Norway, they are that way as well, but they're Norwegians, so they're locals. This is a working ship. And although they're catering and are very, and you'll find that the reception staff and the expedition staff are great with the passengers. I have experience as well. The dining room staff, it's not the friendliest service always that you can expect. And usually it's great, but it's a little bit more matter of fact sometimes. And again, most are great. Yeah, you get a handful. Just like think about the last time you've flown on an airplane, right? Most of the flight attendants are great. Some of them maybe not. And the same thing sort of applies here. So I wouldn't say that it's a negative experience, but if you what I found in the past is whenever I've had a situation where it hasn't been optimal, I've just said, all right, we're just moving you to a different section, and problem solved. So, but yeah, again, I think some people are quite sensitive to that. I haven't found it a big deal, but I get the point.
Mm-hmm. I think that's part and parcel too, sometimes traveling around, experiencing what the culture is like. And you see that when you dine in local places. So
absolutely. And these are Norwegians. I mean, the people here, and, Norwegians are lovely people, but they're quite proud, and some would call them almost arrogant. And, when as a country you've done as well as you have, I mean, Norway gets consistently rated as one of the best places to live in the world and one of the richest countries in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like the Swiss, right? And again, I say that with all due respect, but yeah, they're proud. I hesitate to use the word because it sounds negative, but yeah.
I don't think you would continue to put this trip out there if it wasn't to a standard that
not at all
you stood behind. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's the best way to put it.
10%.
Yeah, that's all of the questions that have come in so far, Gordon, on my end.
Well, I expect that there may be more questions, and I just flipped over it. Of course, as always, we're here to answer your questions. If there's anything that you'd like to know or discuss further, by all means, give Paul a call or drop me a note. I'm always happy to talk about this trip in particular because it is one of my favorites. And I really think it's something that everybody should try once in their life. You really should go on this trip. So please do come join us next May. And if you are interested, drop Paula a note. She will send you a booking form. And I didn't put what our next webinar is because we haven't actually announced our next webinar. So It'll be in the newsletter this weekend.
Surprise.
Yes, surprise. But stay tuned, and thank you for joining us today. It was great to see all of you. Well, not see you, but to have you join us on this webinar, and look forward to seeing you on our next webinar as soon as it comes out. If not next week, it'll be the week after. Take care. Have yourselves a great day.